Hopefully everybody was able to grab a copy of tonight's presentation and a half sheet of paper from the main lobby for a survey. Welcome. My name is Phil Ormiston. I'm the supervisor of English and Social Studies for the district. Before we continue though, I have to point out in the event that there is an emergency, the emergency exits, the rear of the auditorium from which you entered, and on the left and right of the stage if there's an emergency. I also want to point out that we know when we were scheduling this evening that there were going to be some conflicts for parents and that not everybody will be able to come tonight. So we are videotaping this presentation and we'll have it available on our website so that people who are not able to come are able to hear what we have to say tonight. So just please be aware of that. My name is Bill Ormiston, like I said. With me is Jennifer Nimmo, Supervisor of Literacy and Elementary Curriculum, and this is Katrina Kieran, Supervisor of Math and Science for the district. We're the curriculum people, and since Common Core is all about curriculum, we want to talk to you tonight as parents as you understood what we're doing to implement the Common Core. Four goals we have for this evening. To begin with, we want you to understand our instructional goals as we're implementing the Common Core in this district. We want you to understand that Common Core is one part of the Regents Reform agenda, one aspect of Race to the Top. We want you to understand how we're supporting the Common Core, and we want to begin to identify how we, as curriculum people, can help you as the parents work through this change. Since Common Core started, since we started hearing about Common Core, we've heard many, many questions. What is this all about? There's a lot of information out there, and I want to be very honest with you. Since we've been doing this, we've seen a lot of misinformation as well. And really, our goal tonight is to communicate to you as clearly as we possibly can what we're doing in Washingtonville. We are implementing the Common Core as required by state law, and what we're doing to implement that. Please understand there are things about current educational reform that we support and there are things we don't. We're hoping tonight that you'll understand why we are supporting the Common Core here and what we hope to get out of it. Common Core, though, is a term that has become an umbrella to cover many different aspects of the Regents reform, of education reform. However, like I said, there are other aspects that we have questions about. Testing, evaluations, things like that. We do have questions about those, and we will continue to ask questions of our legislators and our state education department. But the term Common Core, like I said, is becoming the umbrella. And there certainly are a lot of questions about it, and there may be a movement that's growing to try to do away with the Common Core. Part of our goal tonight is for you to understand that if that happens, there are things about curriculum instruction that we believe in that we will miss out on. So we also understand that you have a lot of questions. Please think about those questions in your mind. Have them. You might be ready to ask them. Please do so at the end of our presentation. If we have answers for you, we'd be very happy to share them with you. Sometimes we might not have answers, and we'll tell you we'll get back to you. But please keep in mind our goal tonight is for you to understand how we are implementing the core here in our district and what we can do to help you. Tonight's format is, I will begin by talking a little bit about the background, standards, and so forth. I'll move into secondary, ELA. Mrs. Nimmo will talk about elementary, and Mrs. Kiernan will talk about mathematics in the district. And then at the end of the evening, we'll open it up for any questions you have regarding the Common Core standards here in Washingtonville. And we'll also ask you the survey for the end of the night is to have you give us information on what you need to help you as we move forward. We understand the change is not easy. We understand this is a big change. We understand there are many questions. We understand some questions have not been answered. We are attempting to help answer these questions for you. Importantly, as the curriculum people in our district, we have very specific goals for our students. I want to make sure I have the right slide up there. We want to ensure that the children going through Washington schools become critical readers, critical writers, critical thinkers. We want to ensure they become people who can solve problems, who can work collaboratively. And for me, very specifically, we want students to become people who can learn to learn on their own. Mrs. Kiernan and I do a presentation every year to the freshmen in what's called the freshman seminar. And we talk to them about these skills. We talk to them about when they graduate high school, when they shake the principal's hand and get that high school diploma. This is what we want them to be able to do. We want them to be independent learners. We want them to be able to solve problems. We want them to be able to think critically. These are what guide everything we do as curriculum and instructional leaders. I want to briefly go over some of the terms that you may or may not clearly understand, because there are a lot of new terms. Race to the Top, abbreviated RTTT, it seems like every term has an abbreviation. But Race to the Top is the federal program that's initiating Common Core learning standards in an attempt to make every student college and career ready. It also includes providing annual professional performance review for teachers and data-driven instruction, which is the testing aspect of it. Those three things make up Race to the Top. Since Race to the Top was first introduced, 47 states have signed on and have accepted that they're going to implement these things. In New York State called it the Regents' Reform Agenda, and they adopted the Common Core state standards. And something to be really clear and understand is there's a difference between Common Core state standards and Common Core learning standards. And we'll explain that a little bit as we go along. All the states in the country that were adopting the Race to the Top accepted the Common Core state standards. New York State added more to it, and they changed the name and they called it Common Core learning standards. We're asking you as parents to be as informed as possibly can, and that's why we have you here tonight. As you're doing your research and you're online and you're hearing things, pay attention to whether you're looking at Common Core state standards or Common Core learning standards. Because the Common Core learning standards are what we have here in New York. There will be some things that you see at the national level that we're not necessarily doing here. There are things that we're doing that are not necessarily occurring at the national level. But it's very clear that you understand that. New York State also adopted the data-driven instruction, which is the testing program. We've had testing in New York State for a long time, so that wasn't a new thing for New York. Many other states had to start that. And we also had to adopt the annual professional performance review, which is the evaluation for teachers and principals. I want to give you a very, very brief history on standards because they've been around in New York for a long time. In 1996, the Commission then, through the No Child Left Behind Act, initiated standards for New York State. And that's where we started benchmark testing and fourth and fifth grade ELA and math. We've had those for a long time. I was a newer teacher, and I was a younger teacher at that time when I experienced those here in Washingtonville. Race to the Top, like I said before, is the current federal implementation of standards, and it's an attempt to nationalize educational standards. Like I said, the Common Core standards, majority of states have adopted them, and New York is now calling them the learning standards. The Common Core learning standards. I want to reiterate the three elements of Race to the Top. Common Core learning standards, data-driven instruction, and PPR. I want to remind you too that there are things that we support, that there are things aspects of this that we are behind. There are a lot of questions that we still have about much of this. However, tonight we really want to focus on the Common Core learning standards. We understand the other areas have concerns. We understand that. We understand you have questions and things like that. But really, our goal right now is to make sure you understand what we're doing here in Washingtonville. One of the hot topics for the past year and a half have been the modules. You've heard them, that we are implementing the modules. The modules are New York State Education's articulation of the standards. There's a term that was phrased pretty quickly last year called just-in-time delivery. When we started reviewing the Common Core standards, and this goes back, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years, when we first started getting information, New York State actually started revising their standards. And they started holding forums and invited educators, K through college, to meet and talk about the standards that were first started in 1995 and revised in 2005. I was involved in those forums. I spent a day down in Yorktown, and we talked as educators about what we can do to make those standards better. And what I have to say is that a young teacher at that time, those standards were overwhelming. In fact, research was done to show that it would take 22 years to actually implement those standards in the public education system. There was no way we were going to be able to do that. So when the new standards started to be reformed, and they held these forums to get together and talk about what's going to be real for teachers and students. That started growing momentum, and New York had put together an organization to really revise the standards, and they were creating some good things. And then all of a sudden you hear at the national level this movement about Common Core and national standards. New York kind of pulled back a little bit and said, you have to wait and see how this goes. And then as that gained more and more momentum, as the federal government decided that they did want to have a national standard, they started looking around to see what was there. And they looked at what New York had started to do, and they pulled a lot of that in. So as we started looking at the standards, really 4 or 5 years ago, we were involved in helping to create those. They're slightly different, but for the most part, they're very close. As we progressed, we realized that New York State wanted to provide these modules for us. Testing was going to be measuring the implementation of these standards, so they wanted to provide a curriculum, they wanted to provide modules to the teachers and to the school districts that were going to help them understand the standards. Something I want to be clear about too is these standards really are redefining what we're doing at grade levels. And we'll explain that as we progress in our presentation tonight. They are creating new bars for our students to meet, and I'm sure as parents you're seeing that from your children at home. They're also doing a nice job of articulating things that we want students to do, and we'll explain a little bit about as we go along. But this just-in-time delivery method was, as we were getting ready to implement these modules, the state kept delaying the rollout of them. We were attending training sessions in Albany to learn more about them, and they were not moving along as quickly as we had expected. When we rolled out the modules last year, as many of you might be aware, a lot of times the teachers were getting it very much at the last minute. That was an issue, and that was something that we really tried to work hard and work through. But we decided that understanding the realignment, the redefinition of what's expected at each grade level was important. And as we were attending the training sessions, we were learning that these modules were really going to help us and help our teachers learn that. And we'll show you a little later some of those differences. So that's why we decided we wanted to implement these modules. There were and there are struggles with them. There are hurdles. There are things we are working through. Yes, we know that. We've adopted them and we're adapting them. We're making some changes. As we get a better understanding of what's expected at grade levels, we're making some modifications. I'll talk a little bit about some at specific levels in a minute. You've heard that the modules provide a script and that teachers are expected to read from a script. Yes, the modules have provided very specific strategies to follow in a lesson. But I'll be honest with you, in my first couple of years of teaching, I scripted my lessons. Because when I was a new teacher, I didn't know where things were going to go. I was handed a curriculum guide, and I was handed a list of books I was going to do, and I had to work through those, and I learned to script my lessons because I wanted to know what I was doing with my students. And I think we've all experienced that. The script helps teachers understand the progression of a lesson, but it's not meant for them to follow verbatim. Some might early on, and I have encouraged my teachers to do that so they clearly understand. And an example I have is in my 7th and 8th grade classrooms, the teachers started doing it, and in the first lesson they reviewed, they added something. They felt something was missing, and they added it. Well, guess what? That showed up 2 or 3 lessons later, and there was a reason why that waited until later on those lessons. That part of working through the modules is important because they can see the progression. They can see the progression of the standards. They can see the progression of what the students are being asked to do. And again, I'll get to some more specifics about that. So, one of the things we did while we were in Albany, because these modules were new to us, is that we talked to everybody up there. We were there with other professionals. We spent a period of time, for a couple of days at a time, and we spoke to them. We spoke to them about what they view as the standards. What's important to them? How are they doing things? And we came together and realized that this is going to help us with education. The modules really provide, the Common Core Learning Standards and the modules delivering them really provide for us a clear, focused, and consistent approach to education. And again, in my career, it's the first time I've seen something like this. I've always struggled with that. I've always wanted to know why we're doing what we're doing, what's happening before us, what's happening after us at each grade level. These are helping us define that. Many times, what students experience is based on a teacher's knowledge, a teacher's experience, and we have wonderful teachers here, and they're very knowledgeable and very experienced. But a lot of times, there are gaps or repetitions. I can remember early in my career, this was Kieran and I were on the same team teaching here in the middle school, and we were receiving some training over at Little Britain. And we were in the classroom, and we were amazed to see a lot of things that were on the wall that Little Britain teachers were using that were very similar to what we were doing in the middle school. That was shocking to me as a teacher, that there were gaps and there were repetitions. And we worked hard over the years to try to identify those. These standards and the modules are helping to do that for us. They're helping to make a consistent, level playing ground for all the students. They're establishing vertical and horizontal expectations. Like I said, we want to know what's happening before us and what's happening after us. There is not always enough time as educators to meet and plan and know clearly where people are going, where the grades above us are going, where the grades below us have been. This is helpful.
Just to speak to that for a moment from math, most of you might have experienced being in a math class, and every class you probably remember always starts off talking about the number system. You know, let's group the numbers together, whole numbers, integers, and it gets repeated grade after grade, and that really turns students off. And the way the modules now progress, the way Mr. Emerson is explaining is, we are now finding where and at what grade level these things are appropriate to be teaching our students. And they're getting reinforced across, and it's really a K through 12 progression that we're seeing with these modules. And we're very pleased with what we've seen because it does help take out the repetition and put things in an appropriate place for the students' development.
To continue, these modules and the standards are helping provide real-world applications. It's going to help improve literacy, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, because that's an issue that we're facing here. I've had a saying with my teachers and students for a long time that everything is a reading test. And as adults, I'm sure you see that. Everywhere you go, everything you do, it's a reading test. And we need to make sure that our students are well-equipped to be critical readers, and critical writers, and critical thinkers, so that they'll be able to pass those tests. Whether it's day-to-day, whether it's on the job, whether it's in college, whatever it is, we want them to be critical readers. So that's the foundation, is we're evaluating everything we're doing. Is this going to help improve our students' literacy, and not to exclude math, our students' math skills as well. One of the important things, too, is that there's a focus on quality, not quantity. The 1996 standards asked that every student in New York State read 25 books a year, and as a teacher, we struggled with that because we found that the students were skimming it. We were trying to do as much as we could, as fast as we could, and it was a mile wide and an inch deep, and that wasn't helpful. We want our students to be able to read closely, to be able to look at text, and be able to pull apart what the information is in that text, be able to understand it. I think for a long time, as an English teacher, when we assigned homework for students, we've always wanted them to read. I'm very much concerned that our students read as much as they possibly can, because there are a lot of distractions, and we'll show you that in a little bit, a lot of distractions in the way. Our students are reading less and less. They really are, and I've seen it a lot more with technology that's been coming out recently. They're less engaged in text. They're reading less, they're learning less about reading. If we can slow down and have our students really work through a text and have them understand what that text, what the author is trying to portray in that text, that will help them. So we want to focus on quality, not quantity. Now here's where I really want to talk about what's dear to me with the Common Core learning standards. You may have seen this if you've been reading up on it. It's the changes to ELA instruction, and it's been called the 6 shifts. You see them everywhere if you've been watching it. These are very, very important. The first shift, they're important because they're helping to identify what we need to be doing differently in the classroom. The first shift is to read more informational text. Some of the information, some of the videos, some of the documents that we've seen over the years to try to articulate this has talked about American education has done a great job of helping to teach kids to read and write a good story. And if you think about the things that kids have read when they were children, maybe even if you remember back to when you were in school, a lot of what we were doing was narrative. Students are reading stories and they're writing stories. Tell us about your summer vacation. Tell us about this, tell us about that. The big change here is we need them to read more information and text. I've been an English teacher for almost 20 years and I support this 100%. As an English teacher, I was trained in literature. I became an English teacher because I loved literature. And the first reaction that came out of this shift was, we're going to lose literature. I'll be very honest and very blunt with you. I don't believe we have literature to begin with. Because I believe our kids have done everything they could to avoid reading our literature. We see it. We see students do what they can. We assign books, we assign classic novels that are great novels. As an English teacher, I love to sit down and discuss them. But when we assign it, the kids don't read it at home, or they look at Spark Notes or Cliff Notes, Monarch Notes for those of you who may remember those. Doing everything we can to avoid reading the literature that we're trying to get them to read. And these are wonderful books talking about great lessons. But we're not losing it because I don't believe we had it to begin with, because our kids struggled with the reading. If we can improve their reading skills, we can maybe get them back to reading classic literature. If we can make them better readers, if we can make them lifelong readers, lifelong learners, because they have the skills to do that, we'll get literature back. But we're not going to lose literature, partly because we're going to just read more and more and more. So that's a big shift, and I want you to understand this important thing. Our traditional English curriculum really has been geared towards students who are going to become English majors or English teachers, and that is not the majority of our students. The majority of our students are going to move on to careers that are going to involve information and text much more than literature, and we have to prepare them for that. The second shift is increasing their knowledge in the content area. We've seen a drastic decline in students' cultural, historical awareness. When they do read the literature, they miss a lot of the illusions because they're not as aware of the disciplines. This shift is to really build that knowledge in those disciplines, in science, in social studies, in the arts, in math, because math is a reading test as well. So we need to build their knowledge there. In the younger levels, the information text they're reading is science and social studies. So that's going to help us there. We have to read more challenging text and not as clear. That is really clear. We have to challenge students. Research behind the Common Core shows that when students graduate high school, they are not yet reading at the college level. Most textbooks written for high school, except for math, for science, are written at the 9th grade level. Those are junior and senior textbooks. So when a senior graduates, having read a 9th grade reading level, and then they jump into college, when they're reading college level, there's a gap. And we need to help fill that. So our students need to be exposed to more complex readings, to sustained readings. Think about technology today. Think about the internet. Think about the information you access on the internet. Is it very short, quick, to the point, precise? It's training us to read short, precise things. It's not helping us read prolonged articles. It's not helping us maintain a thought, watch a writer create an argument, and go through that text. We need our students to be able to do that. Think about the emails you receive. As an administrator, my teachers sometimes look at the length of my email and think, oh no, I can't read all of this. But think about the text you receive, and when you start reading it, do you say, I don't have time for this? Or do you say, I'm going to work through this and understand it? We need to ensure our kids can work through those longer texts and that they can understand those. We need students to use the text, to use what they read when they're answering questions. A lot of times a question that they answer, they start talking about everything they know regarding this. And for a while, our intentions were to relate the text to the students, so we often ask them, how do you feel about this? Does this relate to your life? Where have you experienced this in life? That's an important part of connecting to a piece of literature. But often, they forget to talk about the text, and they miss the intention of that text. So they have to be grounded in what that author is saying. They have to understand what that author is saying and be able to explain that and articulate that to their colleagues, to their peers as they're discussing a passage. To be able to explain it to teachers, to be able to explain it to adults, to be able to explain it to you as parents. They have to use evidence from the text, and that is something we're seeing already. In the 7th and 8th grades, as we started with the modules, I've been in classrooms, and I've seen a do now question spark a conversation between 10, 12 students where they have the text in front of them and they start ping-ponging back and forth. And they're using the text. When they write, they're using the text when they speak. And the last big shift is vocabulary. Vocabulary is extremely important. It's what's going to help our students become better readers. And there are different approaches to vocabulary. There's a traditional approach where they get a list of words and have to memorize and have a quiz. That's helpful to a point. But real vocabulary growth comes from using the words, really digesting the words. How is the author using this word, and why is this word specifically adding to the meaning where another word would not be? As students are reading texts, they're looking at drafts. They're looking at some of the famous speeches and looking to see those people, those presidents, those people who wrote those speeches, went through drafts and changed words. Because word has such a huge meaning, and we want to make sure they have the correct word. We have students creating vocabulary journals, because we know every student comes with a different understanding of vocabulary. So we have them creating vocabulary journals that are personal to them. Instead of me giving them a list of 5 words that they may or may not understand based on their experiences with reading, we're helping them to identify the words they don't understand. Vocabulary is extremely important. So these are the 6 shifts. These are what's driving the changes in English language arts education. And Mrs. Nimmo will talk a little bit more about that as we move into the elementary levels. I told you I wanted to show you a progression of how the standards are helping to redefine what we're doing at each grade level. This slide might be a little blurry to read, but I basically just copied parts of the Common Core Learning Standards. And as you see, the first standard, this is the Reading for Informational Standard. The first standard under the Key Ideas and Details section for 6th graders asks them to cite textual evidence to support a concept. They're asking them in 6th grade to cite one piece. In 7th grade, we're asking students to cite several pieces. That's what we have to understand, the delineation. And in 8th grade, we need to be asking students to understand and identify the textual evidence that most strongly supports a point. So we're progressing from 6th grade, one piece of textual evidence, 7th grade, multiple pieces, and 8th grade, we're starting to evaluate that evidence. I said to my high school teachers end of last year, beginning of the summer, if your assignments are asking students to cite one piece of evidence, you're doing a great job at teaching 6th grade. That's part of why we're doing the modules, because the modules are helping our teachers to understand the expectations of each level. I'm going to take a break for a while. Mrs. Nimmo.
Thank you. I supervise the elementary classrooms. I'm in the classrooms with the children. I'm working with the teachers and working with the principals. So I'm going to pick up with what Mr. Armstrong said, but at an elementary level. We still have to work on the basis of the same ELA shifts that we went over. When we started this transformation 2 years ago, we started putting the shifts into the curriculum. What I am going to do for my approach is break it down by more specific grade level, K2, where we build that foundation and then build on it further at the 3-6 level. The first shift that we have to work on in the elementary classroom is reading as much nonfiction as fiction. In past programs, our reading was based more on fiction and not the nonfiction. So that was the first part we put into it. In a K2 classroom, a lot of the nonfiction is brought in through the listening and learning modules, providing visuals, providing stories, giving them experiences in science and social studies to build that. How I also broke it down is in the 3-6, students are having more reading assignments based on real-life events, biographies, articles, historical events, and really taking it and balancing it between the nonfiction and the fiction in the classroom. I also want to give suggestions at home. What can you do at home to help this movement? Have more nonfiction texts available for your students, simple trips to the library. In the K2 classrooms, we do provide suggested reading, and having more fun with nonfiction in front of your students. Because at the younger levels, that's a hard reading to do for them. It's not where they gravitate to at the reading library in the classroom, but making it a fun experience for them is the goal of the teachers and the curriculum. The next shift is learning more about the world you're reading. We have integrated more science and social studies content. Students at a very young age are beginning to look at primary source documents. These are first-hand testimony or examples from people who have had direct experiences with a certain topic. We begin this exposure at the K2 level more through discussions and visuals and talking and having them be exposed to topics. In the 3-6 level, they start to have this experience more through the 3-6 texts that are selected to support the curriculum. Most of the time it's through a central text, a main text that they're working on for those lessons, and then other articles, biographies are brought in for them to make those connections. A big way you can help at home is when you see a topic that is being explored with your students at home, talk to them about that topic, have books, have discussions, anything current going on to expose them, to keep that topic current with them. We are definitely reading more challenging material. So in order for our students to do that, we had to approach it 2 ways. In our K2 classroom, we are really having them look at reading assignments at a very basic level. In kindergarten, we are asking them questions, having them dissect the information they're reading. We're prompting them, we're holding their hands doing that. As they progress into the grades, students will have reading or writing assignments that they really have to retell or tell something about this difficult text that they're trying to read. So we have taught them strategies, and we begin at a very young level of how do you read that text closely? How do you unpack that information so it makes more sense to you? Some strategies you can use at home. Reread with your student until they really understand those difficult parts. Read books at their comfort level, and also maybe read with them books above level to help support them with the different types of text expectations they'll have. And model that even ourselves in our own daily lives, we will come across texts that may be difficult. How do we break it down? How do we unpack the difficult text? We're really, our goal at the elementary level is to move away from students just reading and recalling information, and for them to really be able to summarize, form their own opinions, and really give us back information about what they're reading. We're beginning to have students talk about what they're reading using evidence. In the past, if you asked a question in an elementary classroom, they would give you an answer. Lots of times it could be a one-word answer. We know we get those from our students all the time. I'm a parent also, I get that. So what we're trying to do is really have students at a basic primary level, the K2 level, retell with facts, go back into the text. Why is that so? Why did the author talk about that? Give me some examples. They have to support their ideas with evidence, and that all goes back to having them read closely. Ask your child when you're at home, provide me evidence. Tell me, why do you think that? Why is that the answer? Our children love to argue with us. Fine, you would like to argue with me about that? Why? Why is that your reasoning? In the K2 level, we have them really beginning to verbalize those arguments with us and providing that detail, and then simply putting it very basically into writing. At the higher levels, the 3-6 level, they're citing that evidence in their writing. They're citing that evidence when they're speaking with their teachers. And they're actually beginning to form judgments and opinions and have discussions with their peers in the classroom on the topics, and they're able to support their thinking. The next slide I have is actually of a textbook of what it looks like in an elementary classroom. We call it, I don't know if you're nodding and seeing your children's novels more in the 3-6 come home this way. These are what we call evidence flags. These are reading flags. It assists the students to mark their text, go back, and provide that evidence. Write about text using evidence. Many times when we ask children to answer a question, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's on a test, students need to provide evidence with that. Students were having difficulty about that. A few reasons. We were reading a lot of fiction texts where it was more of an opinion or a thought or a feeling. They could maybe summarize, but they weren't fully answering the question and providing text detail. The lessons we are providing now give them opportunities to go back, read the text, understand what was the author really talking about, what was the purpose of what was being said in that maybe particular passage or that chapter. And then from there they can actually form arguments in their writing, supporting it, maybe debating it. So it's really making them have a deeper understanding of the text. Encourage your children at home to write with evidence and to provide details. Also with that, before I move on, within that too, we are always still following our grammar and spelling as a district at a foundational level with our students, so they are also becoming masters of the English language in the writing and also speaking. As Bill said before, we need to teach children to know more vocabulary words. We were very good at teaching children to learn content-specific words, but we need to focus more on academic words. What are academic words they are going to see in their entire academic career? And we were getting data very easily saying that sometimes that one academic word in a question, evaluate, opinion, compare, was holding the student up from answering it in the manner they needed to. So those words are exposed to the curriculum at a very low level, beginning with their kindergarten students, through listening and learning, and then a progression throughout the grades. To help with this, read as much as you can with your children at home. Yeah, I know time is a crunch and it's hard to get it all in, but every moment that you can take, every second you can do it, I encourage you to do it. And not only point out content vocabulary, but academic vocabulary, those words that you constantly see through their career. As well as in the upper grades, we have a progression of standards. Students in the beginning in kindergarten, they'll provide key details for us about reading. We will prompt them, we will help them. then they begin to answer about key details on their own. And by second grade, we're having them answer specific who, what, when, where, how, why, and beginning to provide that text evidence with it. What should you see in your children's backpacks when they come home? Real-world examples that make what they're learning in ELA make more sense to them, so they have connections with it. Books, articles that are fiction and nonfiction, and writing assignments that require students to provide evidence when they're writing. What are some questions you can ask your child at home at night when we can find them in it? Did you talk or read about anything in class today? Do you have any evidence about what you talked about and what you read? Did you learn any new words in class today? What did they mean? How did you spell them? And how did you use evidence in school today, and where did you get it? Do you understand that at the K2 level, we do this more through listening and just discussing? At the 3-6 level, it's more through writing. Thank you.
And now it's my turn to talk about math. What you see on the screen in a second are 8 mathematical practices. We, again, started incorporating Common Core foundational aspects a couple years back. And these 8 mathematical practices that you see here are basic habits of mind for productive mathematical thinkers. And there's no arguing that any one of those items that is on that list are not a good mathematical skill that students should possess. You know, they need to learn how to persevere through a problem. Sometimes students are so focused on getting the answer that they don't necessarily own the process. They don't really have a true understanding of how they got there. They just memorize the steps to get there. And that's the traditional way of teaching math. You know, your teachers gave you algorithms, and you either memorized them and were successful, or you struggled your way through them. So these mathematical practices, we again started infusing into the classrooms a couple of years back. If you've been to some of our open houses, you might have seen them up on the walls in the classrooms. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to try to answer for you as we go through these slides. So the first question is, you know, again, listening to the feedback that we hear from parents and teachers, you know, why are they teaching math this way? And the Common Core standards were written by a group of mathematical educators that got together and they took the topics in math and they came up with progressions. And they have these progression documents that lead you through, you know, where do you start learning fractions, you know, and when do you start adding fractions, when do you start, you know, applying fractions in different ways. So they've taken these topics and they stretched them out and said, you know, this developmentally should happen at this grade level. And they've sliced up the topics to go across the levels. So just knowing that the Common Core standards for math are a K-12 progression. And that's one of the things that I have to constantly remind teachers about, because while I am a true believer in the progressions of this mathematical Common Core standards that's being presented to us, I am not in favor of the way it's being implemented. It's been thrown at the teachers, and there are some conceptual gaps. And we're working our way through that right now, and we're trying to support our teachers. You know, the K1, 2, even 3rd grade, those students are doing okay right now because they're learning new ways to think about math. We're finding the struggles are coming in basically 4th through 9th grade right now because we're doing some major backfilling. And we had no choice in that, you know. So again, I'm going to try to answer some of your questions as we go through this. And those progression documents, I started sharing those with the teachers when we did summer professional development time so that they got a good understanding of how the math would unfold. We're teaching for understanding prior to setting out the algorithms. This Common Core method does get to the algorithm. You will see the traditional methods of teaching mathematics that you went through in school. But that's not the starting place anymore. The starting place is building that foundational understanding and moving your way through to the algorithm. And then when the students get to the algorithm, it's like, oh, this makes so much sense because we built that understanding into getting there. So my next question I was going to answer, you were, what are the modules? Or how do the modules progress? I'm sorry. Okay. And the authors of the Common Core took the math modules and broke them down. From kindergarten through 5th grade, it's called the story of units. And they want this progression in math to unfold and tell the students a story. And that's why each level is labeled a story. When we get to the middle school, 6th to 8th grade, the name of the story becomes the story of ratios. And that proportional thinking is huge, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And when we get into the secondary level with 9 through 12, it becomes a story of functions. And it's very important. I've seen a huge emphasis on graphing in the high school right now. We've started to teach some of the modules. We have an 8th grade accelerated math class here in the middle school. And the 9th graders over at the high school are starting to delve into those modules to get a good understanding of what the expectations are going to be when they sit for their exams in June. So, again, we're not happy with the implementation of these modules being thrown at the students. So we have adopted the modules, but now we're adapting them. Every module starts with an overview, and it tells the outline of what's expected to be learned during that module. And then there are standards that are listed that are going to be covered. And there are also foundational standards that are in the beginning of those modules. So a quick example I could give you is the 8th grade teachers just started doing transformational geometry. And the 8th grade standards are listed there, but there are some foundational standards that should have been presented in 4th grade that have to deal with angles. So knowing that, the teachers are able to fit that into a lesson. They're not following the script per se in that lesson because they know they need to meet some needs in order to get the students ready for what they have to teach them at that 8th grade standard. Okay, so I'm going to flip to the next question of what does the module lesson look like? And this is true, this outline here that we have up here, there's 4 basic parts of a lesson on the elementary level. Every lesson starts with a fluency practice. There could be 2 or 3 fluency practice exercises that start off every lesson. It's a variety. Some of them take as little as a minute to 2 minutes. Some of them could take up to 10 or 12 minutes. So, but there's a variety there. And the reason for putting fluency in at the lower grades is because you want to build automaticity of facts. Because what you're doing is when students can quickly recall some of those facts that we used to memorize, they're clearing up brain space so that they can think about more challenging problems and applications instead of having to stop and say, oh, what's 6 times 7 again? The fluencies build that in for them. As you move into the secondary level, some of those fluencies will fall away because according to the Common Core standards, which again is a K through 12 progression, the fluencies have been mastered in their foundation at the elementary level, so they start to fall away on the secondary level.
I'm just going to comment on that for a second. Our 6th grade math teachers saw that right away during the training over the summer. We don't have fluencies. As we saw the students coming into the classrooms and seeing the weakness with the fluencies, we instantly put those in, even though the program did not require it, filling that conceptual gap for them.
And then the next 3 components are, they're in every elementary and secondary level lessons. There's a concept development, which you can relate to direct instruction. Then the students spend time working on application problems where they're expected to use what they've learned during class. And then the lessons end with the student debrief. And that's the time where the students are engaged. And the modules and the script provide questions to pose to the children to engage them in discussing what they've learned. And that's a very formative assessment for the teachers, and it's very powerful to get a good understanding as to what the students are getting or not getting, and can guide future instruction as the teacher plans the next lessons. So this is a question that I love to ask. Why are they reinventing math again? In my career here, I've been in Washingtonville for 20 years, and there's been many changes, and we've had to retool math several times. And that speaks volumes in itself, because if you keep retooling, something's not working. So now that we have the Common Core, and they have a K-12 vision, I believe that if we stick with the Common Core standards in math, and don't change and throw it away, like some people are trying for it, please don't do that. I really think that this is a great approach, because we're building such a strong foundation for our students with the understanding, so when they reach algorithms and they get to challenge themselves with higher mathematics, they're going to be ready for that. The math that we're looking at right now, there's many tools that are involved, and I'm sure when you see your kids bringing home their work, you're saying to yourselves, okay, number bonds, tape measures, rec and recs, what are these tools? But the program starts teaching the students from a concrete basis, something that they can see, it's tangible, it's real. Then they get them into drawing pictures to make models of what they're learning and thinking. And then they move into the abstract. That's where you start getting your algorithms and your rules to follow. So that's part of the progression there. There's a big emphasis on problem solving, because we want students to know and understand math and be able to use it and apply it in situations. And then we also are encouraging our students that there are multiple ways to represent their understanding. Again, in a traditional math class, you might be used to the teacher marking something wrong because you didn't follow the steps that they told you to follow. This approach allows the students to come at a problem from several different angles. And some of the conversations that I've seen students engaging in the classroom, some of the teachers are stepping back and saying, wow, I didn't think of it that way. But the approaches that they're taking are legitimate, and they are founded, and they work. So that's a big positive that I've witnessed in the classrooms. And we're also teaching the students a method called read, draw, write. And we want them to read through, like Mr. Ormston said, we even read in math class. You have to read through the problem and sift through the information to figure out what's important, what do you need to help solve this problem. And then we have them draw a picture or a model of what they're looking at. And then we ask them to write at the end so that they're owning it. When they can explain something to you, they understand it and they own it. So that's one of the methods that's also being introduced. And I can't say enough that in this method, understanding precedes the algorithms. They are going to get to those traditional algorithms, but it's no longer the starting point. And then there's a quick example here on the next page. The old way of doing math and the new way of doing math. This is just one example that I thought might help you see what the differences are. They will get to that traditional way of, lining up your numbers. It's a 3-digit addition problem. Line up the ones, line up the tens, line up the hundreds. You notice there's a 1 hanging over the 7 because we know we have to carry over. And I have asked people, well, why do you have to carry? And some people can't, in conversation, you have to do it. It's a rule that you follow, but you can't explain it, so you don't necessarily own it. Where a new approach that they take here is they start the kids off adding from left to right because you naturally read from left to right. So you start off looking at the same addition problem, and you say, okay, there's 700s in the top number, and there's 100 in the bottom number, so I have 800s. And again, remember in elementary level, it's a story of units. So this has a major emphasis on helping them understand their place value. When you get to the tens place, you have 3 tens in the top number, and you have 8 tens in the bottom number. So altogether, you have 11 tens. Notice I wrote the number 110 there, right? But that's 11 tens. And the students start to think about it that way. I'm a math person, and when I started studying this and learning about these changes, it took me a while to wrap my brain around that, you know. But it really does make sense. And then the last digit, you know, you have 5 ones and 4 ones, so you have 9 ones altogether. And then you add up all the numbers again. And you say, okay, wait, in the second number, I have 11 tens. That means I have a bundle of 10 tens, and that makes 100. So that's why you're adding that other 1 to the 8. And really, as the kids practice this, it makes sense to them.
Please add 799, 899, and 999.
Can I just wait until we're over at the end of the presentation?
We're going to, we have a few more slides left with
They've done
We invited people here to hear information about how we're putting the Common Core, and then we're going to get to a session where we're going to be able to answer your questions.
We'll get to the question section and then, okay. And then my last slide, you can flip to my last slide. And there are just some suggestions on how you can help your children, because, you know, it can be frustrating, you know, your students are coming home and you're not familiar with these methods, the new ways of thinking about math. One of the most powerful things you can do is ask your child to explain, well, what did the teacher tell you to do? And if the child can help you by explaining what the teacher asked them to do, then you know that they're getting a good understanding, even if it doesn't quite go right to you right now. We have a lot of resources on our district website that you can go to. And there are a lot of similarities between Common Core math and Singapore math. And I want to say that there's a resource document on our website that will talk about the different tools that I mentioned earlier. And just knowing what those tools are and how they're used might help clear up some of your questions. And then the other thing I've found in my exploring is there are teachers around New York State that are posting lessons to YouTube. And you can go on YouTube, and I know for a fact that there was a 4th grade teacher, and she titled her lessons Module 1, Lesson 1. And then the next video after that was Module 1, Lesson 2. And there are a lot of teachers out there that are willing to help each other. And you as parents, you know, you're looking for answers. And YouTube is actually a very powerful tool these days to help find how to do things.
We'll explain the idea of this distraction in a minute. We will. We're just about finished. So please be patient and bear with us. Some things that we've thought about is, to go back to our intention, we want you to be as informed as possible. We want you to be aware of what we're doing in Washingtonville that might be different than what other districts are doing. So we thought about what we can ask you to do to help us, because we are a group, we do need to work together. We understand as parents what you're going through. We have children ourselves. I have 4 children who are experiencing this as well, so I do understand the frustrations. Please continue to be as informed as possible. I said at the beginning, please understand that there is misinformation out there. One of the resources you can use is us. We can be very helpful in trying to clear up what we're doing.
Nobody answers, nobody wants to answer.
I have not received a phone call from you. So I'd be more than happy to sit down with you and explain what we're doing here and then answer your questions. So I will do that.
We also included a survey at the end to get as much feedback from you of how the three of us can assist you further. We also know that at the elementary level, we've had one building have a wonderful math night to help parents, and the other two are getting on board with offering that for you also. So we do look forward to your feedback on how we can further help you.
One of the things we want to understand is that children do need to struggle. They do, up to the point of frustration. And that could be a different point for every child. That could be a point. That's how children learn, by working through problems. I want you to, they should be enjoying learning, yes.
How many math applications have our district come up with? And every time you turn around, it's a new one for these kids to learn. And you wonder why they're screwing up on the test. But they should be taken anyway, because honestly, those tests do not judge our children.
No, they don't.
There are things we support, there are things we don't. I'm expressing to you as far as English goes, and Mrs. Karen is expressing to you as far as math, why we're supporting this. Because these are things that are going to help our students get back to the goals.
How can I help my son get to God when he's unable to explain to me what to learn on today? You have to teach him math yourself, and then he'll get in trouble for doing it the wrong way.
I've spoken to my teachers about this, and this has been a big question at the elementary level. As Bill said, I'm also a parent. I'm a parent of a child in this district. I understand that it's different than how I learned also. I do have experience, my forte is in literacy, but I am learning the modules also. So what I had guided my teachers to do is say, you are the expert with the curriculum. You are teaching the child. As parents, and I'm speaking to you as a parent, we need to provide that space for that student to work on the homework. We need to provide that support for them, the guidance. And our teachers know if it comes back and it wasn't, they couldn't get it, they couldn't model it, then it's the teacher's job to take that information that comes in and reteach. And that is what our teachers are doing.
Sure.
New math that are starting. That's fine for the kids that are in kindergarten, first, yes. What about the kids who have been 5 years in the district, 6 years in the district? You can totally confuse the hell out of them.
We've brought those concerns to the state ed department, and we have told them that they should have a phase-in implementation, and they don't. And they said,
And I have a teacher who tells him, and this is a direct quote from the teacher, I can't help you, I don't know it. What happens in appropriate education? Because I'm sorry, that appropriate education just seems to be missing somewhere.
Yes.
I'm not going to disagree with what you're saying.
Do something about it. But I'm a student to do something.
If I could get,
Yes.
I'm telling you what's happening in every student's classroom and what we're trying to do to support them.
Hey, we've done massive amounts of research, and this is a way I think we should teach our children this stuff. Once it gets down here, you start picking and poking and taking out and adding and carrying around. We're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, we're going to put this in and that in. You don't don't have the basic program anymore.
Right.
They can sure crumble made clam chowder.
Yes.
I have a son that's fourth grade right now. By the time the effects of this are shown 7 years from now, he's going to be a junior in high school, and I'm going to be screwed if he doesn't get through this and he wants to go on to college.
Right.
You don't have any point of no return here. We can't say in 2 years, wait, this is not working, let's try something different. Okay? I started out in school grew up years ago, like probably many of us in this auditorium tonight, learning CJ run, CJ run fast. By the time I was in high school, we ended up with half-year classes in English doing world lit, English lit, mythology, mass media, right on down the line. What happened to things like that? What happened to making the kids sit down and write a book report by hand? He'll learn this and he plays this game on the computer. I'm going to take whatever it takes to teach my kid math. I struggled in math one time with percentages for many years. Oh, you take the number, you put it in.